Welcome back to the 5th video on how I use Photoshop to draft patterns. In this video I want to take the upper torso block and refine a few things about it. This will involve demonstrating how we can move some darts and convert many of the straight edges into curved ones. So let's begin. The first thing I want to do is to move the dart that goes from the bust point to the shoulder. As things stand, the dart currently heads towards the inside shoulder, that is where the neckline meets the shoulder edge, but I would prefer it to move it to the middle of the shoulder. The first thing I do is to make a copy of the side front section by selecting it in the layers window and dragging it down to the new layers icon. Using the ruler tool, I measure the length of the shoulder, divide it in half, re-measure it to establish the halfway location, and drag in a guideline to mark this midway position. Taking the pen tool, I click near to where I am working on one corner of the underlying grid, and whilst holding down the mouse button, drag out to the right so that the manipulation guides extend horizontally along the underlying grid. Still holding down the mouse button, I then press and hold down the Option key on a Mac or Alt key with Windows and drag the right hand manipulation guide downwards to move it to the vertical axis. In other words, I'm creating a starting point for my line that begins with a right angle corner. I next click and drag downwards on bust point 12 so that vertically orientated manipulation guides appear. My line is currently set on fill in the presets, which I don't want, so I go to the fill box in the presets and change this to empty, the white box with a red line crossing through it. And I change the outline colour to red. This is just so it stands out a little clearer from all the other surrounding lines. Using the direct selection tool, I pick up the top starting point and position it upon the midway location of the shoulder. I then pick up the vertically orientated manipulation guide by clicking and holding on its end point, and whilst holding down the Option or Alt key, I manipulate both guides until the horizontal guide aligns along the shoulder. In this way I know that the line coming out from the shoulder begins square to the shoulder edge. By playing around with the lengths of the manipulation guides, we can increase or decrease the bowed nature of our curved line. At this stage, the curved line passes beyond the dart edge of the side front section. I select the copy of the side front section. Then using the direct selection tool, I drag a box over this edge to isolate it. This reveals the manipulation guide of point 12. Selecting the end point of manipulation guide allows me to change the orientation of the edge. All I want to do is to bring the edge further out so that my red line falls within its borders. The original version of this shape I hide by clicking on the eye symbol on the layer. I then take its copied version, right-click on its layer and select Rasterize Layer. Rasterizing prevents any further manipulation of its edges. Going back to my curved line, I make a duplicate of it by dragging its layer down to the new icon symbol. Taking the direct selection tool, I change the orientation of the manipulation guide aligned along the shoulder just so it juts away from the shoulder. I drag a box over the end point of the line to isolate it, select the pen tool, click on the end point again, and then begin to click anywhere outside of the side front section, until eventually clicking on point 12 to form an overall shape. I go to the fill box and select a fill colour, ideally one that matches the outline, or we could select a fill and then select the outline box and choose not to have any outline colour at all. Next, I rasterize this layer. Okay, time to use a new tool. This is the Quick Selection tool. Click and hold anywhere on the shape just drawn and drag the mouse around a little until you see a shimmering outline around your shape. Select the side front layer from your Layers window. Right-click on the canvas and select Layer via Cut. This will cut a segment from the side front section that matches the shape we drew. Delete the shape we drew and select the cut segment. Select the Move tool Click on one of its highlighted corners, move the center point to point 12, and pivot the segment on point 12 until point 23 touches point 13. So what we have done is closed up the dart gap that came down from the inside shoulder and opened it up to the mid-shoulder location. Make a copy of the original curved line. Using the direct selection tool, pick up the top corner and move it to the opposite dart corner. Manipulate the guides to align along the underlying grid, and move the leftwards pointing manipulation guide to the right. We can now manipulate the guides to align along the shoulder again. This allows us to restyle the curve, but we take care not to affect its length. That is, we want to ensure that both dart edges are the same length. So using the Move tool allows me to check the lengths of each line by comparing them side by side. It isn't easy to measure curves in Photoshop, but one way in which I can measure things is by simply using the Move tool to pivot one edge along the edge of the other. I do this in incremental steps by aligning the edges together, and then at the points where the lines begin to diverge, I move the center point to that location and pivot one edge to remove the divergence. I carry on in this way until reaching my destination. My new curve is a little shorter than the original one, so I deepen the curve of the new one a little to increase its length. Okay, everything is in place, so now I can select the front section and using the direct selection tool, manipulate the inside shoulder corner guide to align along the shoulder edge. Add an extra corner for the mid-shoulder position, create a right angle corner and manipulate this until forming the new overall front shape. I can then delete the layers of the red line and the cut segment. The side front is a rasterized version that cannot have its edges further manipulated, so I reveal the original side front section and manipulate the relevant corners to produce the new side front shape. I can then delete the rasterized layer and the original drawn curve. All done. The next thing I want to check is the overall neck opening. I make a copy of the back section and using the Move tool, I align its shoulder edge along the shoulder edge of the front section. This is called truing up. It allows me to see whether neighbouring edges are the same length. In my case, the front and back shoulder edges are different, so I need to check which is correct by using the ruler tool to measure them and make adjustments to the one that is wrong. It also allows me to see how smoothly adjacent edges run into one another. So what I notice is that things are not quite perfect with the neck opening at point 13. So while I have the back layer selected, I also select the front layer. I can now drag a box over point 13 and this will reveal the guidelines of both the front and back sections. This then allows me to manipulate the guides for both sections. Ideally, I am looking for the guides to align along the same axis. If other lines in a drawing get in the way, just confuse our vision and so prevent us from achieving our goal, we can always turn them on and off by clicking on the eye symbol of their layer. Once happy that the overall neck opening looks like the one continuous line, I use my curved measuring tool to measure the overall curvature, which I want to be around half of the bottom neck circumference measurement that I took from the person I am making the garment for. This doesn't have to be exact. If we have no such tool, we have to persevere in measuring the curve using our straight edge ruler in incremental stages. With everything okay, I use the Move tool to reposition the back section by aligning it to its original version. The original version can then be deleted. Next up, I want to move the back waist dart. At present, it is slightly to the right of point 17 of the back shoulder dart, but ideally I want it slightly more to the left of it. I drag a guideline in from the sides to establish a vertical guideline coming down from point 17. I select both the back and side back layers. Using the direct selection tool, I drag a box over points 41, 39 and 38 to isolate them. Then I use the arrow keys on my keyboard to slide all points concerned further to the left of the vertical guideline. I then reposition the underlying guides, points and labels from the original draft. Next up is the connection between the back waist dart and the back shoulder dart. Now point 17 is not a true measurement, it was just a guide that heads towards the approximate location on the body for the prominence of the shoulder blade. So we can actually delete any anchor points at point 17 by right-clicking on it and selecting Delete Anchor Point. We can then use points 41 and 20 to finesse the curvature of the edge. For point 20, if we hold down the Option or Alt key while manipulating the guide coming in from the shoulder, this maintains the right angle of the point 20 corner. We can now move on to the back section and do the same between points 41, 17 and 16. Finally, we need to make sure that both sides of the shoulder dart are the same length. Select the side front section, select the Move tool, click on one of the highlighted corners of the surrounding box, pick up the center point and move it to the point along the curved edge where the two sides of the dart start to diverge. Pivot the side front section to close up some of the divergence. Move the center point to the closed up region and pivot again to close up the next bit of divergence, and so on until reaching the end. My edge runs a little short of reaching point 16. Now I could deepen the curve edge to lengthen it, or make the back section's edge more shallow to shorten it, but instead I use the ruler tool to establish a straight shoulder edge by aligning it along the 15 to 16 shoulder. I am not actually measuring anything here, just establishing the orientation of the straight edge, so length at this stage is irrelevant. I bring in guidelines to mark the end location of the ruler. I draw a new straight line which measures the overall shoulder width. I can then use this line to help me change the locations of the side back section's shoulder points. I can then reverse the order of checking the lengths of the two dart edges to make sure I haven't messed anything up until the side back shape is back in its original location. One of my final tasks is to turn the straight edges that form the waist darts and side edges into curved versions of themselves. Here I first choose the two back sections in my layers window, and using the direct selection tool to isolate the various points concerned, I orientate the manipulation guides so that they come vertically down from point 41 and go vertically upwards from points 39 and 38. I can use the underlying grid to any dragged in guidelines to help with this. What I want to ensure is that the manipulation guides for point 41 are the same length, and the guides for points 38 and 39 are the same length. This then ensures that both dart edges are identical mirror versions of each other, and so the same length. For the bottom edges of all the sections, it doesn't really matter how we draw these, whether they are straight, bowed or wavy, as these can all be altered later depending on the type of garment we want to make. So really all we are interested in is making the dart and side edges vertical as they come down from the bust line and up from the waist level. At the front, I lengthen the vertical guidelines to raise the point along the dart edges where the bowing in curvature begins. This kind of imitates the higher position up the rib cage where the underneath of the breasts start. And finally, I just want to add some shaping into the center back. Here I select the back layer and bring in point 1 by 1 centimeter. The manipulation guides are orientated vertically at points 1 and 0. As I have now shortened the waistline by 1 centimeter, I need to re-include this lost length, so points 39 and 38 are brought closer together by ½ centimeter each. At this stage I am happy with how things stand. I have an upper torso block that I can now work with to produce a design. But before I do that, I want to include one extra feature. I want to introduce graded lines that will allow the block to be used with any thickness of rubber sheeting. So join me next time when I will demonstrate the principles of including negative ease.